Hi, I'm Dr. Amy Robbins, and welcome to Life, Death, and the Space Between podcast. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and medium, and here we explore life, death, consciousness, and what it all means. As the co-founder of the Global Grit Institute, a mental health training platform for leaders and coaches, co-founder of the Dharma Coaching Institute, training thousands to live their best lives, and a thriving coach in her own right, Neeta Bhushan has helped thousands of people move past their heartbreaks, failures, and disappointments. And after years of research into human behavior, observing people in their worst and best moments, being a mother of 2 small children, and failing more than a few times herself, Neeta knows what it takes to get back up no matter what bowled you over. Her new book, That Sucked, Now What, is a real talk guide to personal growth that draws on and embraces the suck and helps you break through to lasting, audacious resilience. Welcome, Neeta.
Thank you so much, Amy. It's good to be here, love.
I could really use your help. If you haven't had a chance yet to listen to my season 5 opener, go back and listen to that. But in the event that you don't, I need your support. If you've been listening to me for a while, or even if you just started, you can go to Patreon and put in Dr. Amy Robbins. And there you can find different levels in which you can support the podcast financially. At this point, I have no ads. I have no sponsors. I am solely self-funding this podcast, and it would really help me out if you've gotten something out of this podcast. If you could donate $5, $10, or even $20 a month just to help me out, to help support the podcast. I'm continuing to work to try to get sponsors, to try to get advertisers, but until that happens, I need your help. And there are other ways to support the podcast. In addition to Patreon, you can like the podcast, you can subscribe to the podcast, you can rate and review the podcast. I always love reading your reviews. They're really heartwarming to me, and it's the emotional currency that I get from providing you with this resource. So please take a moment to just help me out here. You can also find the links in this episode, in the episode notes, as well as on my website at dramyrobbins.com. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Dr. Amy Robbins. Love having you here. So let's start with your story, because it's one that is, wrought with trials and tribulations and loss and sadness and heartbreak.
Yes. And wow, I'm so glad to be on the show that celebrates, all of those dimensions. I mean, like you, I think we connected before we pressed record, but I grew up in Chicago. My dad was from India and my mom was from the Philippines. And so Chicago has been my home for so many years. It's where I, attribute kind of the initial building blocks of everything, that all of the things that I talk about in my newest book there. And my origin story is that I grew up really early, and at 10 years old, my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I remember so vividly because I actually had the chicken pox. And, back then, anybody
something no one knows about these
80s
days.
or 90s,
right,
we would get something that was called chicken pox. And chicken pox was very itchy and scary. And if you scratched, I think I still have scars to this day of how big those pock marks are. It's not smallpox, but probably just as bad. I think probably smallpox is worse. But so for a 10-year-old girl, I just remember, being at home, couldn't go with my parents. Everyone had left the house, and I was left with my great grandmother, my Lola. And this was my mom's grandmother. And she was watching me and she couldn't touch me because she's much older. She was, I think, in her late 70s or 80s. And poor thing, she barely spoke. She's Filipino, so she only spoke Tagalog. And so we would communicate just a little bit in a little bit of words. But I remember this so vividly because she just gave me a bottle. I had my canopy bed in my bedroom, and she gave me a bottle of this pink lotion, calamine lotion. And she's like, here, you put on your body. And I'm like, but I'm itching. I just want my mom. And so, and little did I know that everyone had left, my dad, my mom, my brothers, because my mom was having surgery. And it was etched into my mind that, okay, wow, no one is coming to save me. I have to take care of myself. And that would be that first intersection of, okay, I have to do this on my own. And when they came back that evening, or maybe it was that evening or the next day, I don't even, recall at this point, but there was something, different, because then my little brother, he had the chicken pox, and my mom, was there for him because she was recovering from her surgery. And I had made that meaning that, oh, wow, I no one's taking care of me, but is there for everyone else. And then they had broke the news to me that she had breast cancer. And so for those 6 years, this would be that hallmark of Neeta, the eldest, taking on personal responsibility for the entire family. Because if you're growing up in a Filipino Indian culture, the eldest usually takes on those responsibilities. Well, things got so bad when I was about 14 that she was in and out of hospitals, and she ended up perishing and transitioning when I was 16. And the cancer had, spread to her lungs at this point, and, throughout her body. And so you can say I pretty much grew up with my brothers in and out of hospital settings, especially the last few years of her life. So between 10 and 16, this was kind of my normal.
Right. It's such a pivotal time when, you should be with your friends and figuring out life and
making those mistakes
and
getting in trouble. I mean, I still got in trouble. But for me, I think education was definitely one of those things that both my parents were tiger parents. They were like education, success. And so we would still, do the piano lessons, the ballet, the dance, I didn't do the spelling bee. That was one thing I did not do. But it was expected to perform, and it was expected to succeed academically. And so then fast forward, we were finally starting to heal after my mom died. And then, a year after, almost to the day, my brother, DJ, we were 15 months apart, and it was, homecoming. And I, at this point, went to Lane Tech, which is in the city. And he actually went to private school, Catholic school, Gordon Tech. And literally they were right across the street from each other. And we were going to meet because Lane Tech had a homecoming game. And we never did meet that day. And he actually had an asthma attack as he was walking out of school. And, his inhaler wasn't working and collapsed in front of the school. They tried to revive him 3 times, and he transitioned. He transitioned that day. And some say that he transitioned to be with my mom because they were very close, very, very close. Unfortunately, it happened. Yeah, on my mom. It happened on my brother's 12th birthday. So it happened on my youngest brother's birthday. So, so this was not only traumatic, it was heart-wrenching, it was awful, it was anything that you can imagine. I just remember just fully, screaming and in such agony and pain, and my dad just totally going into full deep depression during this time.
I mean, he lost his son and his wife in a year. You lost your mom, your brother. I mean, your family, really, right?
Pretty much. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. And so that was a really dark time. And I think when you're also a teenager, and I was a senior in high school at this point, I mean, we had an outpouring of incredible love and just the outpouring of support from people we didn't know at both schools, at my high school, at even other high schools. There were people banding together. This was before even social media, coming to the school, writing letters to our family. I mean, we just had such an outpouring. And, my brother wasn't an athlete, but this was before a lot of the, athletes were passing from, having asthma attacks on the field. He was not a football player. He wasn't, he played chess. So there was definitely a really dark time. I couldn't go away to college, and I had to make again that decision that I did at 10 years old. I was reminded again at this point, like, okay, I have to step up. I'm strong. This is what my dad was telling me. Neeta, you're strong. You're the oldest, and you are going to be here. And I was so torn because part of me really, I applied to all of the schools outside of Illinois and couldn't. And so, 2 years while we were figuring out how to heal, going to, talk therapy and, trying to really make sense of this loss and our losses. And people don't really know what to say, right? Especially to young people. And so, and
it's not on their mind. Like, I'm assuming your friends, like, they, at that age, you're so self-absorbed. It's like, yes. Okay, everybody probably after a week or two went back to their lives, and yours was
not the same.
Not the same, right?
Not the same. I mean, there was definitely a through line, and I'll get into it in a moment. There was a through line though, because I, at my brother's funeral, even after they had ribbons to commemorate him, a memory of him. It was, they made these silver ribbons that everybody wore, and literally people wore that for a year. And so there was such an outpouring. And like I said, I think that really shifted the way we communed. And where I had a big Christian community come, they would pray for us. And it was just very unique. If I look back to be like, wow, our teenagers in our community really stepped up, even though they may not have had much languaging, because there were times where I felt very isolated and didn't want to be known as that. That was the family. That's the girl who lost pretty much her family. And so 2 years after that, we would have another instance of trauma. My dad would be diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. And so at this point, I'm like, is there a God?
Right.
I grew up with so much faith.
Must have been like, what card did I draw here?
Yeah. And you go into such victim mode. I write about victimhood in my newest book, the victim and the victor. But in those situations, you can't help but think, why me? And there's no other feeling. And I think we have to actually experience those emotions fully. For me at that particular time, I was just trying to get out of survival mode. And at this point, I had a chip on my shoulder. I had the chip on my shoulder of having my youngest brother. I'm like, we are not going to succumb to pity. And so we're going to just work, double the time, overwork, overachieve, overdo, like kind of like I'll show them or I'll show the world. And it was sparked by this, all of these emotions, anger, sadness, grief, just jumbled up in every way. Of course, didn't have the language for it. Yet we did have an outpouring of support, and that was my extended family. And my dad would lose that battle 9 months to the date. And so at 19 years old, now I'm an orphan too, and really a caretaker to my youngest brother.
How old was he at the time?
He was 14.
Okay. So it was just the two of you left.
It was just us two in our immediate family. And, and this is where community comes in. And I feel like for me, community has been the through line of my life. So entering my 20s, leaning on external support, leaning on, I call them the matriarchs, my extended aunts and my grandmother, who then came in as mama bears, to raise us in many ways. As we all know, it takes a village, and our village showed up. And I think that ultimately that also contributed to what I used as my coping mechanisms in my 20s, because in my 20s, my coping mechanism was, yep, I'm good. I'm okay, because that is what I was told. You're okay. You're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. There was never this permission to say, that really sucked. I'm so sorry you are going through this.
I mean, if there was a word more powerful than sucked, which I'm sure there is, like that fucking sucks more than anything, I think even that wouldn't really capture what you went through.
Well, and this is what I talk about too. I think that we were now in a place where it's so easy to numb emotions. It's so easy to numb our state of mind, because we do have devices that can do that very quickly. We numb, we suppress, we bury. And many times it depends on how we were raised and how we were brought up. And so for me, going through some of the thickest, darkest times of unimaginable loss, unimaginable grief, and this all happened within a span of 4 years in my adolescence. I didn't know what the tools were, and which is why it's really informed my trajectory. I wouldn't hit my full rock bottom, because people ask me, was that really your rock bottom? I wouldn't hit that until a decade later, because in my 20s, I was so focused on, let's get us out of the dark cloud. Let's get us out of the dark cloud. And if anybody listening to this has experienced loss, has experienced just, many different punches and upsets one after another, and you're like, is this ever going to end? Trust me, I know. I was there, and I did whatever I could to just climb out of that chaos, the soup that I was in. I mean, that's one of the reasons why my subtitle is called How to Find Magic in the Mess and Find the Joy in Chaos. And to arrive at, okay, I can channel my grief, I can channel my sadness, I can channel my depression, which I didn't even know, I was in a very dark place until I experienced the opposite, until I experienced falling in love and, having a dream wedding and all of those things, the contrast of that. One of the things I didn't do well, it was my personal romantic life. I hung on to relationships, love relationships, so that I wouldn't be alone.
Yeah, I would imagine it was so scary for you.
Oh, yeah. I was trying to recreate a family, and so much so that I would meet the greatest and most important relationship for me, which was my first marriage. And I went to dental school. I became a dentist. I fell in love. I got married, and I literally thought I had all of the trappings of success. I mean, it looked good from the outside. I had purchased a practice. I mean, I was like cloud nining, and one of the few outside of dental school in the very beginning to do that. And, I felt like I had climbed mountains. And
well, in so many ways, it's like education became your vice, right? Like that became your addiction in a way.
Oh, that was an addiction. I had people ask, well, at least you didn't have one of those, drug addictions or sex addictions, and I said, well, an addiction is an addiction. And a lot of high achievers.
It was success addiction, right?
A lot of high achievers are addicted to success. Well, and because our society encourages it, we value and we validate success. And, one of the beautiful topics I really talk about, especially for our next generation, is how do we really create our own internal locus of success for our inner selves, not the external, because it's so easy to be validated by the external. Of course, it's what I lived for. But I had to go through a very rock bottom relationship. In fact, that the shiny objects of the trappings of success, this beautiful wedding, this quote unquote, perfect marriage that everyone told me from the outside, I was hiding a really big lie. And that big lie would come out in my late 20s, where I would be faced at another intersection in my life as my life was threatened, and I had to make a haphazard decision to leave a tumultuous relationship. And that was that relationship. And it took everything out of me, because coming from a background, Filipino Indian background, we don't talk about these taboo topics. We don't talk about divorce. We don't talk about domestic violence, even though it's so prevalent in those communities, immigrant families. And I felt like such a failure. I felt like oh my gosh, people are going to find out that I'm a fraud, that I'm broken, because I had climbed this pinnacle of success.
Right. And in some ways, you were probably in the community seen as someone who overcame, right? And look at what she's achieved despite everything she's been
through. I was
through.
that model child,
right?
For everyone in our community. Oh, look, despite everything, you should follow what she's done, etc. And here I am carrying this big lie. And that was where I had to take everything in my soul, and really what I talk about and what that time of my life was is my independent awakening. Because again, coming back into myself, quieting the sideline noise, quieting that external validation, good or bad. And I remember vividly leaving that home on December 31st, 2011. And I would embark on the biggest self-love journey of my life. And that would
How
be for
old
the next
were you?
5 years. I was in my late 20s. It was a full Saturn return for sure for myself.
Well, and I think at that age, I mean, that's such a brave thing to be able to do. And most people, it takes years and years and
29.
years. Yeah, for them to get to this place of really looking at their life honestly and saying, this is not right. And I need to leave. I need to figure out a different way to be in my life. I mean, it's so, I work with people for years. It takes years to get people to that place.
And, and because you're, a clinical psychologist, I remember speaking to my therapist, and I remember in the days right before the big reveal, the big leave, I remember saying, I just don't want to disappoint my family. And just
those messages are so strong.
And just saying that and articulating that and giving voice to what those thoughts are in our mind. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I wrote a chapter on how to embrace the suck, because so often we're ruminating our deep, dark, ugly thoughts in our mind. We don't want anybody to know. But now we have a way to actually just acknowledge it. And as soon as those words left my mouth that day, and I remember his name was Josh, was my therapist. He's like, why do you think that? What is the worst that could actually happen on both sides? Like, what is the absolute worst? Well, okay, that, my aunt, some of my family members won't talk to me. And then he's like, well, what's the best thing that could happen? That I won't be in a relationship anymore that doesn't serve me. And when I said that, that's when it clicked. That's when it clicked. And, so I'm so grateful for the angels that were kind of surrounding me in the form of, therapists and guides and friends And many times you don't listen to your friends or family members. And many times they know that you're with somebody that they probably shouldn't be with.
And I think friends and family often have a hard time saying that, right? People don't want to speak that truth because they don't want to hurt you, or they don't want you to be angry with them, or it can create a chasm in your relationship if you feel like they see something that but you don't want to, you're not ready to see yet. And I think that's really where a professional can be so helpful, because it's like they don't have their interests feel like they're solely for you. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they can say those things without, sometimes it does ruin the relationship, but oftentimes you're there in the hopes of growing and learning. And so it can help shift things.
Oh, 1000%. And that was really the beginning stages of that full reclamation back to myself. And, I say this with such conviction, when we have a fall, there's, a 5-step process that I talk about in the third part of my book, That Suck Now What? And it's a framework that I call fly forward, because when we have a fall, and I had many falls before this particular fall, we are faced with an ignition. We are faced with a fire lit up our belly, our butt, somewhere. And we are faced with a very big decision. Are we going to stay? Are we going to go? Are we going to make a decision to seek help? Are we going to acknowledge that we need help? Are we going to, get on a different diet, or actually take charge for ourselves, take that personal responsibility? Because again, no one is coming to save you, right? Mm-hmm. And it went back all the way to when I was 10 years old. And it was like, okay, I needed to confront my biggest fear. And honestly, mm-hmm. that biggest fear was being alone. And, for anyone who's ever been in overlap relationships, or are courageous and brave to seek their patterns, that's where the work is. And many mm-hmm. times, yes, seeking out help in the form of, therapists, coaches, healers, whatever calls to you. I dove into all of that. And it took me into the most incredible places, and it really began to inform and have me unlearn a lot of what I did learn, the coping mechanisms, the patterns I had, the beliefs that I had formed subconsciously, to start clearing out and allowing myself to feel. Mm-hmm. And this book teaches you how to feel in order to heal, because so often we are in this world that is so fast and so quick. And so what's the next? What's the next? What's the next? And we're not allowing ourselves to really sit in the suck. And for the first time, at the end of my 20s, I was allowing myself to sit in the grief, not just the loss of my relationship, but the loss of the decades worth of losses that I had just shoved in the back of a closet, underneath my mattress, shoved under all of the medals and the medallions and the accolades and the straight A's, because I thought that was going to fix my hurt. It was going to fix my years of trauma and pain. And it only, that rug just got really high. Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think, over it. Yeah, I think that what I hope people are hearing is how essential it is to address what's happening to you. And at 10, you might not have been able to have the words to fully understand it. And therapy may or may not have been helpful at that time, but as an adult, the meaning we make of our life and those experiences and how we make sense of it. And someone else might have had that same experience and had a different meaning that they made of it. And so their outcomes might have been different. Like maybe rather than holding on so tightly because the fear of being alone, they might have pushed people away because they don't want to have people leave them again, right? So like how we make meaning in our own experience is different for all of us. And it could be someone else could have experienced the same exact thing, and how they came out of it looks different based on how they made sense of it when you're like still in this little developing phase of life. I mean, it's just
absolutely. I mean, they've done so many of those studies, right? Where they take twins who are, who were kind of from war-torn countries, and, basically they're either separated at birth, or one stays with one relative, another stays with another. One makes a meaning of life that, wow, I'm so grateful for this opportunity. I'm so grateful for life. And the other one makes the meaning and grows up thinking, wow, the world is bad. Don't trust anyone. Nothing ever good comes out of adversity. And so the one that has this, optimistic mindset grows and flourishes, while the other one is like, oh no, and constricts and doesn't allow anyone to be in their sphere. And they're they're twins, they're related.
Right.
And so we see this, so often that, and to your point, to really allow ourselves the magnifying glass. And that's, even part 2 of my book, I talk a lot about this concept called the bounce factor, where we don't have to, live in what we couldn't control in our past. It's the reason why my book is called That Sucked, not This Sucks, meaning like we're still in the suck. We're acknowledging what sucked, that sucked, and we're hopefully giving, honoring that in saying, wow, okay, I acknowledge that I couldn't control that. I acknowledge that that happened. And now here we are past it. And then now what? But in between that, there's that vulnerability to say, yeah, that really did suck. And wow, I felt blank, or this made me feel X. And that's where, in the bounce factor, I talk about looking back at your upbringing. Well, what were you told about and this is, I'm sure what you, love as well in therapy, what were you told as a child?
Right. What messages did you get? Right.
What beliefs did you actually make subconsciously, or maybe you had no idea that you were carrying around a resentment for a really long time. And are you ready to clear that? Or how was it, the dynamic in your household? Were boys treated differently than girls? I know that was the case in my family growing up. The boys were, at family gatherings, they could play in the dirt and get all dirty. And for the girls, we were prim and proper. So what meaning did I make of that growing up?
Well, and I think what's so important, what you're saying, is it's about what meaning you made, not necessarily a judgment of that, of being right or wrong. It's like, it's just how you made sense of it. And then
the thing is, we all judge it though. And that's what we have to, that's what we have to clear is our judgment. And it's our judgment can be the biggest roadblock for our growth.
Right. Because we judge something as right or wrong, or I should feel or shouldn't feel. And that's where, especially in today's movement of real positive psychology and trying to, what I think for oftentimes, this was not the intention of this positive psychology movement, was to like disown the feelings that are more sucky.
Yeah.
It was to acknowledge them and then also move forward from them. And it has become what seems like, let's make everything positive and disavow the negative. And that's why I so appreciate what you're saying here is it's like, there are things in life that suck. We can pretend all day long that they don't. All you're doing is rationalizing your way out of it, sweeping it under a rug, and you're going to have, like you said, a really big lump on your rug one day that you can't climb over.
Trip over it.
Right. Right.
Well, and I think that also with the positive psychology movement, because I was definitely in that camp, I think that was also my addiction. Growing up and getting out of the tunnel was that, toxic positivity was my coping mechanism for a very long time. And I just recall, it was very, it was a family reunion and a lot of family friends, cousins, and it was right after, probably like a college semester. But because I already have such an optimism on life, that's just how I operate. And, the silver lining and those were the emotions that I clung on to during crisis, during trauma. And I know that there are some who get stuck in the suck, that they just can't find anything joyous. And believe me, I used to actually say, wow, I shouldn't be laughing right now, especially after my brother died. There was a period of time where it's like, should I be watching this funny movie right now? No, I should,
right. That's survivor's guilt. Right.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. A ton of that. But to see on the other side where, wow, I only recognized the major amount of suppression that I was doing, that I wasn't okay holding somebody else's anger. I wasn't okay holding somebody else's pain, but anger even more so, where I would attract a partner that was really good with their anger. So much so that I needed to really reclaim myself and my power and my voice, and, do the work to unpack and to heal. Well, where am I not expressing or being okay with my anger, and why is that? And that didn't come until I actually entered motherhood, where that postpartum.
So you got divorced, you left your husband, and take us to kind of where you are now and how you found yourself in another relationship.
Yeah. So, and I think that,
and doing what you're doing now, right? Because
oh yes, I've had many lives. And, I think this is just a beautiful reminder of how, our lives can be. I feel like I've had many, many iterations and many chapters in my life. And that chapter of my life, of the darkness of the phoenix rising from the ashes, that was in that 5-year period where I would just say yes. And it's one of the concepts that I also talk about in my book around how much positive or good stress can you say yes to? Can you evoke? Because as we are saying yes to things that make us feel uncomfortable, things that we are not necessarily confident at, we are starting to shift our neural pathways. We are starting to reprogram our different neurons in our brain so that we can start recreating or creating a different life path for us. And that was in my case. I had to recreate, again, another community, another family, right? Because I had walked away completely from pretty much everything I knew. I uprooted everything. I started to unlearn everything. And that started to happen in my business practices, where I started to lean from a place of vulnerability, sharing exactly what I was going through. And as I've mentioned, that was so hard for me to do. I started saying yes to, all different kinds of, whether it was meditation retreats. This is where my roots of spirituality, going to, church on Sundays with my mom, going to temple on Tuesdays with my dad, going to the Gurdwara, seeing and having reverence for my dad's spiritual practice. He would meditate and he would do these chants, for 3 hours on weekends, and he'd have his mala beads out, and we would take his mala beads, put it on like necklaces. And that was just my remembrance growing up. Well, after my divorce, I took several pilgrimages to different ashrams and allowing myself to sit with, different spiritual teachers. And so saying yes to all of these opportunities. And also because I was very transparent in my work life, that aspect of my business grew and grew. And people started to ask me, how are you, not even there? And I had, other doctors working in my business, and people wanted to know what I was doing, because then I started a nonprofit called Independent Awakening. I started to champion self-confidence in women and girls. I then went to, Stanford at a nonprofit management seminar weekend to learn from the greats who've actually been able to do nonprofit work in a way where it impacts the world. And from there, I started learning from, Stanford Business School professors, where I'm like, oh my gosh, what is this thing called a startup? I didn't even know I had one. And I didn't even think I was a founder, even though I owned my own dental practice at the time. And so it just shifted my world. I then began to say yes to meet with VCs and see how they mentor startup founders. I became an angel investor for female-led founders. And for me, because I kept getting asked, how are you creating all of this freedom in your business? Because there were times where I would just be at the office, once or twice a week at this point in my journey. While my practice started to grow, I recognized that I knew something about leadership that wasn't being talked about. And for me, it was leading with compassion, leading with empathy. And I really wanted to know how that informed the way people make decisions. And this was because I was a psychology major in college, and I was so fascinated always with human dynamics. And that obviously started in the hospital setting of when my parents were sick.
Well, and you had done so much of your own internal work.
Oh, yes. Oh, I was just fascinated, and literally curiosity is what led me, because I kept, again, saying yes. I kept saying yes to being the smallest fish in the room, the one person who came from medicine, who was sitting in a room full of venture capitalists who actually went to business school. And here I am speaking from the heart, speaking from the losses that I've went through, how I had to come clean to my team of 10 while going through, a divorce and, restraining order. So leading with that kind of vulnerability was able to fully shift the trajectory for me. And I had no idea where it was going until after one of my spiritual retreats. I decided that because I was getting asked to speak on more stages, and I knew that it was time for me to close up certain doors. And that's when I made the, I guess you can say, manifestation, the visioning. I said 6 months from now, I will move to the Bay Area, to San Francisco, and I will sell this practice. And this was a declaration that I made after one of my spiritual retreats. It was in a journal. I probably shared it with, one of my closest friends. And she's like, you're kind of crazy. No, you bought the building, you're expanding this.
And you were still in Chicago at this time?
Yes. But I was spending more time out of it than there. And so, it was my ego that was driving, expanding on the one side, but my heart was saying, there's something else that's calling you. And so when I, again, articulated this out loud, and I said exactly what, almost speaking life into this, 6 months later, I sold my practice and I moved to the Bay Area. And I would then chart on the, this full-on adventure of really interviewing 500 leaders on what they think success means and how they climb up after adversity. Because I'm like, am I the only one that is doing it in this way? Or what are and how are ways that other people in different areas, whether you're a Fortune 100 leader or you are a leader in a small ashram in India or Cambodia, or you're a single mom of two in Indonesia, that's where it led. And it took me to all of these different places. And that's where I decided that I would put all my findings in a book. And a year later, I came out with my very, very first book. And that's what started to bridge the gap between, dentistry and my love for human dynamics, but also a way for us to really feel our emotions. My first book was called Emotional Grit. And that Suck Now What is a full extrapolation of this, because emotional grit was really for leaders. And that's how it got me to speak at places like Google in Dubai and Kuala Lumpur in India. And that's where I would meet I met my now husband in different conferences outside of the US. And that would be the one conference where we met again after 3 years of meeting the first time, that we would get together. And so he was living all the way on the other side of the world in Kuala Lumpur. And then we said yes on a journey of love. And so a year after that, we had about 9 different ceremonies. One of them was at Burning Man. and, and we knew we wanted to do things a little bit differently, because we both had been married before. And we knew that our intentionality for our union, and not just marriage, but our union together, was one of, our core values. And this was something, and this is also something I talk about in the book, of how can you define what your values are now, values for even just, in your life, values in, how you conduct business, values in even friendships. But for us, it was so important to come together and do this work before we got together to say, what is it that you really want? How can I support that? Where are you in the stage of your life? And where am I? And do we fit? Because we were coming from different parts of the world too, and different upbringings and different emotional capacities, which is the second pillar of the bounce factor, and even our own awareness around our blind spots, which is, of course, the third, factor of our bounce factor. And then our fourth one is how open are we to saying yes to uncomfortable things, which is our current environment. And so assessing all of these things, I mean, it's why now I use this tool in a lot of the courses and the trainings, and now it's in the book, That Suck Now What. But it began from that place of this brand new relationship, because I did have a fall. I had started dating, I was ignited, and now I was in this rising stage of saying yes to these new opportunities. And guess what? The new opportunities led me to then magnify in my life this love relationship that, yes, was I still afraid? Sure. Oh my God, yes. But was I open to trying? And that's the duality of how two conflicting emotions, sometimes paradoxical emotions, can live all at the same time.
Yeah. And you talk about that.
Yeah.
In the book, which I think is so important, and something I'm always reiterating too. It's like it can be both and.
Yeah.
You can be scared and do it anyway.
Yes.
You can.
And, oh yeah, no. And Amy, and it when I had actually met him, it reminded me back of when I was going through, the grief of watching, both parents, my mom and later, my dad, in hospitals. They were in the same hospitals going through their treatment. And I remember, there was our barista serving coffee, and he was, a cute teenager. And I remember every time I would go visit, that I would go get coffee from him and I would smile and it would make my day and I would get the butterflies in my stomach. So I'm like, there were slivers of joy even through those moments of really tough grief. And for anybody that's going through those really tough moments of grief or transition or just feeling stuck, can you actually find those moments of joy, even if it's just the barista that's smiling at you or winking at you, take it, right? Because that makes us feel alive. And in those moments, was I a giddy little teenager again? I'm like, I did have crushes. I was alive. Just didn't make the right choices sometimes in those love relationships. But you know what?
Yeah, that's what those years are for. Lots of bad, lots of stumbles and falls along the way.
Yeah.
Well, Neeta, this has been, I had questions about the book, but I feel like we talked about so much and it was so beautiful just to hear your story and how you've woven in all of these pieces to create such an incredible life. And I think that when I listen to you and when you say like, what is the value that you hold? What I hear from you is like vulnerability. Like that is such a core value for you, is like, how can you be vulnerable and authentic? And I think that is actually what life is about, is that vulnerability and that authenticity and the ability to say, that sucked. That sucked. And I'm not going to get stuck in that place.
Now what? This is the mantra. That sucked. Now what? And this is, I've led a small practice, from 50 people to 800 people. And it's the same thing. Put your hand over your heart. When we actually have that embrace for ourselves, we are feeling our body. We kind of understand that maybe we needed that embrace. It signals the oxytocin that we probably want from somebody else, but we're giving that to ourselves. We're catching our nervous system. We're calming our nervous system down because we're saying that sucked. We're acknowledging that.
Right.
And then we're saying, now what? Now what? Now what?
I have a question about your mom and your brother and your dad. Have you ever received any signs from them?
Oh, yes. I've always, and this is a great podcast to talk about that. I've seen them in different ceremonies that I've had. I've done different spiritual journeys, worked with different mediums. I've had, of course, many, many, many dreams. And and so it's, I've now known that they are my angels. Yeah.
Well, if people are interested in your work, can you let them know where to find you, where they can? I'm assuming your book is everywhere now.
It is. Yes. It's won 3 awards. We were a Barnes and Noble bestseller. If you're in the US, we were, of course, #1 stress management on Amazon. We topped, I think, 5 international countries, top 10 on Amazon. And we've, it's been amazing. So you can go ahead and get the book at thatsuckednowwhat.com. It actually comes with a 44-page digital guide. I'm actually holding up the printed guide, but I was so convicted to make this so accessible for people, for families, to actually do this work and to even establish your own connection with yourself, but even for your self-healing. This is everything I wish I had when I was going through the dark days myself, of peeling back. What is it that I'm avoiding? What is it that I'm, healing? And for those who do see their therapist or their coaches, that you can, bring this to them so that they can actually hold space for you. But this is one of the ways where I wanted to make it so accessible. So that is free. When you actually go, you can get the book anywhere. It's on Amazon as well. But when you go to thatsuckednowwhat.com and put in, screenshot order number, you can actually unlock the free digital guidebook as well.
Well, thank you so much. This was just phenomenal. And thank you for being the light that you clearly are in the world. It just emanates from you. If anybody's watching this on YouTube, or if you're not and you're just listening, just go check it out visually, because you do just emanate that light, and coming from such struggle and darkness. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing to see. So thank you.
This is such a beautiful conversation. Thank you, Amy, for allowing me to pour into your community today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks, Neeta. Like what you heard today and want to hear more? Wondering what comes next and what it all means? Head over to Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or anywhere you get your podcasts and hit subscribe. Also, if you could take a minute to rate and review my podcast, I would really appreciate it. Stay tuned as we continue to explore life, death, and the space between.